Hello and welcome to Business India with me Tarun. Today we are going to talk about the Modi Doctrine, the foreign policy of India's Prime Minister. No, it's not a discussion. It is a book penned by Sreeram Chaulia. He's Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs. He's here with us in the studio, and this is the book that we are talking about. It speaks in detail about the foreign policy that India's Prime Minister has initiated and developed over the past 2 years. Welcome, Professor Chaulia. My first question to you would be, why this book, and now 2 years into the Prime Ministership, 2.5 years into the Prime Ministership of Narendra Modi?
Well, thank you, Tarun. I've been thinking of writing this for some time, since Prime Minister Modi got elected with a landslide in 2014. And it's now that I thought it would be appropriate, because one had to observe a lot of his practices and policies to be able to formulate a kind of long-term opinion about where India is heading under his reign. And so the idea was to also shape the Modi administration in certain ways. So I've offered a lot of constructive criticism and suggestions where the Modi Doctrine could be finessed and could do better. So in general, it's a positive account of his achievements, but it's also trying to steer him for the next 2.5 years of his first term.
Okay. Professor Chaulia, before discussing this book chapter by chapter, we will first talk about the greatest successes of what the Modi regime has meant. Foreign policy is one of the most talked about successes of Prime Minister Modi's reign till now. How do you look at foreign policy success?
Well, a lot of people thought that he would not be able to handle the nitty-gritty of international diplomacy and come out a winner, because he came from a province of Gujarat, and that he would take time to understand the nuances and so on. But most of these were misplaced, because as I show in the book, he had phenomenal training and exposure to the outside world from a very early age, from his RSS and BJP days, even before he became Chief Minister of Gujarat.
This you have detailed in the book?
Absolutely. So from his Pracharak days, he had been traveling overseas and had been connected to many countries and had observed. And now many people recollect the young Narendra Modi of that time, who was already very curious to learn about especially economic modernization in many parts of the world and how those ideas could be transported back to India.
In fact, going through the book, I have also read about you talking that as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, Narendra Modi already had initiated good relationships with China and Japan as a subset, as heading somebody who heads the state of Gujarat. So that experience he already had over the past 15 years of dealing for Gujarat.
Yes, in fact, non-Western countries, it's so fascinating. Singapore, Japan, China, as you mentioned, these are the ones from which he thought that we could learn more and could benefit more than the advanced industrialized countries. Because the idea was that these countries are the former Asian tigers who have come up the hard way in recent memory. In the last 30, 40, 50 years is when they grew fast, using foreign policy as one of the instruments for economic growth and prosperity. So I think he believes that there's so much. In fact, he went to the funeral of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore,
yes,
and has expressed open admiration for how he turned a third world into a first world nation.
But in fact, this has also been a thing in the recent demonetization which he unleashed. Singapore has come out widely in support of what Modi did in India.
He has always looked for foreign connections, not just to attract inward investment and for trade and for strengthening our strategic ties,
yes,
but also for ideas,
okay.
And that's one of the things I've highlighted in this. Modi is a great learner, and he believes in an open system where India should look at how examples of, for example, if the Germans are developing a very advanced form of apprenticeship and skill development, we can learn something for it for Skill India.
Your book talks about commercial diplomacy. If I take you back in the pre-election stage, Narendra Modi in all his speeches always said that diplomacy is changing, and today diplomacy is a lot about business between countries rather than the age-old diplomacy. How do you explain that in this book?
That is his strength. Commercial diplomacy is what I would say, if we were to grade it on a scale of A to F, he gets an A+, because what he has done, you would see the figures of the inward FDI that is attracted in the last 2.5 years, and also the business confidence is generated around the world about India. Is in a way turned around our image as an impossible place where everything is blocked and there's so much red tape and corruption and so on. And in return, he's actually projected a new image of a kind of a agile India, and therefore the elephant, as I say, has turned more into like a lion, which is the Make in India lion,
yes,
in the eyes of the world. So he has done that very well, and I think he says that many times. I've quoted him in Japan saying, I'm from Gujarat and commerce runs in my blood.
Yes.
And risk-taking, entrepreneurship, I understand all these things.
Are you indicating a strong, prosperous and confident India is what you're hinting at? Because when he does all these outreaches, I think the community abroad loves it.
He wants to project a transformed India, a modern India as he calls it. If you remember Madison Square Garden, there's a very famous speech where he gave the instance of earlier people had the impression that India was this fabled land of snake charmers and beggars.
Yes.
And now he says, "Pehle hum snake se khelte, ab hum mouse se khelte," and mouse meaning the click of the mouse,
yes,
of the computer. So he is trying to project India which is changing, which is young. He talks about the 3 Ds: the demography, democracy, and demand.
Yes.
These are the things. So he is actually a great salesman for India.
So you're talking of a total new jargon that the PM unleashed. We were talking of age-old diplomacy. In fact, you talk about in the book, if I may allude to it a bit, about he changing the approach of the diplomatic establishment.
Well, yeah, we had a very overcautious and stovepiped way of looking things. Our bureaucracy had a certain line on everything and they wouldn't budge. I'll give you a small example. I was talking to former Indian ambassador to South Korea, and he was saying, when previous leaders used to visit that country, they would say, okay, we'll have a CEO forum, we will talk to business people, and maybe we'll make a pitch for investment to India. But Modi will say, find me 6, 7, 8 or 10 people who are very, very crucial and critical and unique and who can make a huge inward investment in India. I will do one-on-ones with them if they want to. I will meet with them personally, with the CEOs of these giant conglomerates, be they state-owned, be they sovereign wealth funds, be they private sector entities, and I'm going to give them confidence. So Modi is like the big confidence boost that India has gotten in commercial diplomacy.
Case in point, I would like you to speak on 2 things. The great success of the India-Japan story under Modi's regime, and also Modi's deft handling of relations between India and USA while balancing Russia, who has been our defense partner and a long-standing ally for years. How do you see him doing that?
Japan, even before Prime Minister Modi came in, Japan was considered a success story for India for the last 5 to 6 years at least, where we had rediscovered each other and there was so much strategic convergence driven by concern about rising China and so on, and creating a balance in Asia. But what Prime Minister Modi has done is the economic interactions were not as robust as they should have been. And what he has done is he's created a special window for Japanese investors. He has gone out of the way. I remember, and I've quoted in the book as well, him talking about how when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, to attract Japanese investors, he would actually create a golf course, because that's what a lot of Japanese visitors would want, and they could not find in a state like Gujarat, which is a traditional place. And so he says, I know what they want, and what they want is not concessions in terms of land and taxation and relaxation of labor laws. No, that's a misnomer. What they want, he says, is some kind of a stable governance structure, what he calls, a good governance state. And that, I think, he has tried to bring from Gujarat to the national level and attract a lot of foreign investors because of that. As far as the triangular relationship with India, USA, Russia goes, obviously, Prime Minister Modi has built a phenomenal rapport with President Obama, and I'm pretty sure it's going to happen with Donald Trump as well. And I show how personal chemistry also matters in this book, especially in the US relationship. He has removed a lot of obstacles for us. For example, the civil nuclear deal that had been signed long ago had been stuck over liability, and Prime Minister Modi found a solution for that. He's also, with Russia, there was a concern that we may be moving away from our traditional relationship with them, especially with defense, and also Russia possibly moving over, making overtures to Pakistan. But what has happened, and I show this in the book, is we value the BRICS connection, we value Russia for its own merits, and we have not abandoned that. So there is some misnomer in some circles that Modi is pro-Western in foreign policy, and I have corrected it. My argument is he's India first, and he will take whatever we can get in economic and military and other soft power means, be it from the West or from the non-Western parts of the world. So Russia remains important. We just hosted a big BRICS summit in Goa.
Yes.
And I think going forward, the military relationship with Russia will expand, especially because for Make in India, in defense, Russia is going to be a big investor.
Okay.
And defense is one of the flagship sectors we have identified where we can produce world-class products. So I don't know about many other fields which have been projected for Make in India, whether they are fanciful and whether they'll actually take off. But in defense, we can be confident because we have produced with the Russians, for example, the BrahMos supersonic missile.
Yes.
So that's the way forward, a lot of co-production. Even with Israel is the same story. You know, Prime Minister Modi believes that with certain countries, we've got to build relations so that they can actually generate massive wealth for India, jobs in India, but also in the process strengthen our influence around the world.
Okay. Taking you away to the Indo-Japan, you see on high-speed rail, there was a lot of traction after Prime Minister took over on high-speed rail. Do you think he's picking up key countries for key strength areas and getting them to invest in India? Because you see huge investment coming from the Japanese, not in the metro rail, but also in the industrial corridors, be it the Chennai-Bangalore industrial corridor or Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor. Japanese are partners of India. Do you see him taking this ahead?
Yeah, Kyoto and Kashi, which
Yes.
is Banaras, which is Prime Minister's constituency, are sister cities. And there is an attempt to create the smart city model, learning from Japanese example of preserving both the heritage and also modernizing these urban centers. Indeed, the bullet train is a big success insofar as we have managed to get on very concessional terms, long-term repayment rates and
From the JICA.
low interest rates
Yes.
on the Japanese. I think the Chinese are also watching it, and they may also get a slice of the pie. And I think it's a good thing because in the way, you know, India is a big market that everyone is vying for. Prime Minister knows that. That's why he says, you know, culture, commerce and civilization, the 3 C's, and I highlight that in the Modi Doctrine in the book, how he has marketed these in order to attract a lot of foreign bidders who want, you know, a slice of the expanding pie, which is India. So he looks for strengths from the Germans. He wants also to learn about environmental, you know, management and urban
In fact,
planning.
your book, when you talk of commerce and other ventures, your book talks about Modi is one of the biggest successes of the International Solar Alliance. You said it was one of his vision. Could you first talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think, see, we were under a lot of pressure to conform to the climate change regime. And India had traditionally been defensive, saying we are a developing country and we have a, you know, a large population that needs to be lifted out of poverty. So we have to have economic growth, and you know, it will mean inevitably higher carbon footprint for us, at least for the foreseeable future. So in order to counter some of the negative international image that was accruing to us because of this, Prime Minister Modi thought upon this brilliant idea of projecting India as a center for alternative and renewable energies. And we have made a commitment in the Paris Accord. I think by 2030, we want to be 40% of our energy mix should be renewables. And where will it come from? Nuclear is a small mix and it is likely to grow, but not as much. So wind and solar is the way forward. And what he wants to show by bringing all these countries together, 120 countries under, you know, one umbrella, under the Solar Alliance, is that India can actually show the way because it's a developing country with and in a way, there are many others who are like us, and who are also been hiding behind the excuse that, you know, we have to grow and therefore we cannot go to renewables. He is trying to show the path through investment, by attracting this kind of you know, collective energy of the international community. 120 countries, to get them on board for a new kind of you know, institution like this is a phenomenal achievement. He does that even with yoga. I highlight that in the soft power section, the cultural diplomacy.
Yes.
We, in record time, managed to convince almost the entire United Nations General Assembly to sign on for yoga. As
That was one of the greatest soft power successes. Do you speak about it in the book in detail?
A lot. In fact, I would say that soft power is another area where our image has improved significantly in the last 2.5 years. We were seen as somehow indecisive or not very sure about what we wanted. But by formulating this kind of a doctrine with clear goals and an objective and an endpoint, which is basically to make India a leading power, as the Modi Doctrine calls it, I think we are presenting ourselves as somehow with greater conviction in the international arena. And soft power is where, you know, whenever he travels, I show how Prime Minister travels record, and he goes to religious institutions, he meets students, he does a lot of public relations.
That's a connect. That's a connect.
Citizens of other countries.
In fact, because you're talking of this, I would like to speak to you about one another thing that you've mentioned in the book is the diaspora outreach. He goes and does massive outreach in whichever country he is with the people. In fact, they say American Indians have been the biggest success story because they wield a lot of power in the House of Congress in the United States, and that he has used that affinity of Indians to their motherland, and with what he did in the Madison Square Garden. So do you think that this is a part of his thought out will to connect with Indians who had been feeling left out or disconnected from their motherland, because he announces these schemes, you know, whenever he goes. So what have you talked about that in the book?
Diaspora diplomacy is another strength of Modi.
Yes.
And I have a whole chapter on it in Modi Doctrine.
Yes.
And essentially what he has done is two things. One, he has given them a sense of connect back to the motherland, which they earlier had felt that Indian leaderships had abandoned them. And somehow we were forced to think that they should shoulder some guilt for having not given back to India in a big way, you know. So that he has bridged it. He talks about a kind of a being Indian, you know, mere pyare deshwasiyon. He always talks about when he addresses the NRIs.
So he owns them. He owns them.
And so he's bringing them back to the fold. 25 million strong, many of them high income and, you know, very professionally successful people, especially in the USA.
No, but you've also spoken in terms of a lot of these people maybe actually be BJP voters too, because BJP has a huge base abroad, and you told that he learned this not when he was Prime Minister, not when he was Chief Minister, but much before that, when he was RSS in serving the party, he learnt about BJP's base abroad. Do you think because of that knowledge has helped him do it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, he has so many connections and networks. I mean, even now when he travels to the US or to European countries, there are people, old timers, who remember him from the 1990s, you know, when he was an RSS Pracharak, and people saying how naturally gifted he is at communication and making friends and expanding the circle of contacts. That is his forte. And with the diaspora, I think it's a very emotional thing, because the second thing that he has managed to do is he has managed to convince them that India is something they can be proud of now. And therefore,
therein lies the biggest success.
It's the biggest, because, you know, we want to attract more FDI from them. It has not yet happened.
So, India coming into its own in Modi's regime?
Yeah, and also we are, in a way, they are like our unofficial ambassadors.
In fact,
and he has given them that power to go out and make us feel, you know, that India is not just a territorial entity,
yes,
but it's a kind of a civilizational entity which is all over the world.
That's the point, a civilizational entity with huge big roots going thousands of years ago. So you mean making the Indian proud of his heritage?
Yeah, so that's natural to his cultural nationalism, and I think that's quite infused in his foreign policy too. I mean, for example, his promotion of Ayurveda or yoga, and you know, even the Indian way of life which he talks about, which is actually less.
So merging a soft power with the hard power, that is hard commerce.
Well, and military too. I talk about how defense diplomacy, the number of agreements you have signed, the number of
the Lemoya being the latest with the United States, the logistics exchange.
Logistics is an advanced one where you're actually giving bases and like fueling rights and all that.
Yes.
But if you look at what we're doing with Japan, if you look at what we are doing with East African countries as part of our Indian Ocean strategy.
The Iran in Chabahar is what you...
That's another big one for us to be able to access Afghanistan via
even the Central Asian republics?
Central Asian Republic, we want to tap more gas from there.
Yes.
But also India has a base there in Tajikistan,
yes,
which is the only one.
Yes.
And we would want to also eventually, you see, the idea is there are some strategic spaces and control over them has been the old game of geopolitics.
Yes.
And people thought that Narendra Modi is more of a businessman and only has a commercial instinct. But what I show is even in military and defense, be it in Make in India for defense manufacturing and becoming indigenously capable, or in being able to forge beneficial ties with other countries where India becomes a net security provider. That's a big change.
Because I would want your view on this also, because recently we were talking of the axis between China and Japan with the $46 billion CPEC. But they say with India and Japan came together to build the Chabahar port, and you have all your trade from Central Asian nations like Kazakhstan and others coming via train to Chabahar and then it coming to India, be it mineral resources, oil and gas and other things. Do you think that was a masterstroke?
Well, no. See, Chabahar, we had initially wanted to do it even before Modi had come into power.
Yes.
But I think Modi wants to speed up a lot of these things because India's image, unfortunately, has been hurt over the last decade or so, saying these are wannabes, you know, they want to be a great power, but they don't implement it, they don't live up to their commitments.
You've pointed out very rightly, and we'll first start chapter by chapter into your book. But before discussing chapter by chapter, when you talk of speeding up, there was a lot of talk about a lot of projects being spearheaded and speeded up by the Prime Minister's office itself. Case in point is the Parliament building in Afghanistan. After Modi came to power, this was a languishing project. It took 10 years, and then after Modi comes to power, he pushes it and gets it done. There are some other projects. Do you think this urge or this initiative to spearhead from the top office itself has made a lot of difference?
Yeah, you know, his governance style has always been that the system may be jammed and clogged, its arteries are all, you know, jumbled up, but I at the top can clear this up. So I will identify strategic partners and make things happen for them over and above this system.
Okay.
So be it the bureaucracy, be it our border roads organization, be it our diplomatic missions overseas, he has tried to infuse in them a kind of a sense of urgency.
In fact, now we start chapter by chapter discussion of your book, and you've got 5-6 chapters in this book. I want to delve into the first chapter where you talk about Pracharak as diplomat in chief. What can people look forward to in this chapter?
Yeah, this one, you know, very few people know about his international exposure and connections from his RSS days. There is a sense that, you know, the RSS is very insular and not open to the world, and they only glorify Indian civilization. But Modi has always been somewhat different.
Yes.
Modi has always wanted to, as I said, like an open window. And he studied, for example, if the Israelis are able to irrigate the desert and make the desert bloom, why can't we implement those agriculture practices back in our country? So he's been looking for these kind of connections all through those days. So in the first chapter, the Pracharak as diplomat, what I try to show is his style of diplomacy, what I call retail diplomacy, connecting with the masses as well as the elites around the world, and, you know, being a rock star basically on the world stage. All of this comes from his RSS background, where he's well trained in bringing groups together,
in organizing, basically,
in organizing, networking. That's his job. I mean, I give an anecdote of him in New York during one of his marathon events, where he's met Obama, he has gone to the Congress, and then late into the night still, you know, people are pouring in to meet him. And then there's one old acquaintance of his who says, "Narendra bhai, how come aren't you tired now?" And he says, "Yahi to mera kaam hai. My work is to reach out
so you've been energizing
and bring India to the world."
Okay, I'm going into your second chapter. We discussed this quite a bit, but dancing with the diaspora, that's one of the chapters where you explain how he's connected wonderfully in whatever nation he's visited with the Indian diaspora. What people can look forward to in your book?
In this chapter, I show, for example, that there are two dimensions where Modi has succeeded where nobody else did. One is he has broken the class barrier that used to fragment our diaspora. Often our earlier administrations, we used to only look either at the elites to try and get some investment back, or only at working class expats, NRIs in the Gulf, for example, from Kerala, as a vote bank for politicians in Kerala.
Yes.
But what I've shown here is he has transcended that.
Yes.
And he has also broken the religious and regional divisions. Our NRIs are often scattered, and persons of Indian origin, OCIs as we call them, overseas citizens of India, often scattered in terms of regional. So the Gujaratis will be one group, and the Punjabis will be separate, even living in the same vicinity. Yes. So what he has done and his party has done behind the scenes is to try and amalgamate all that and to create some kind of a team India for lobbying in India's interests.
Yes.
And also for greater attraction of India and Indian civilization and culture.
Okay, your book talks about, there is a third chapter which speaks about business of India is business. Now, Narendra Modi, much before elections, always said, and I said it earlier in the program, that, you know, diplomacy is not about diplomatic relations anymore. It was about business relations. It's about hard commerce. What does this chapter talk about?
This chapter, I show, you know, all the techniques he uses to convince the rest of the world that India is open and that India is growing and that India is a great opportunity for them. From being seen as a disappointment for the international community, has turned India into some kind of an attraction. And he markets India phenomenally well. It's a lot of hype as well, but I show that behind it is also some kind of substance, because people are not going to fall for the hype beyond the initial honeymoon days of first 100 days or first 2 or 3 months.
Yes.
The fact that he's consistently been attracting foreign attention and interest from CEOs, from world leaders, all of this shows that, you know, there is also something backing up this razzmatazz and the showbiz.
In fact,
so what I show in this is, you know, commerce is something where he's in a way rediscovering the old Indian identity as a great trading and commercial nation.
Okay.
We have forgotten it over centuries of colonialism and socialism.
And
what
very
Modi is
quickly
trying
coming
do
to
is
the
bring it
other
back.
chapters of the book, there are two chapters which generate curiosity. It's leading power versus great power and omnipresent India, extending the arc and the ambit. Very quickly, what do these chapters talk about?
Yeah, leading power is the ultimate ambition of the Modi Doctrine. You know, we want to become a leading power in the world, and my argument is that if you give Narendra Modi a chance for 2 terms, he can make us a great power, equivalent to China and catching up with the United States. So I think what I show is how he has managed this triangular relationship, China, USA and India, you know, is the key thing. There is for example, an analogy of an isosceles triangle where there are 2 sides which are close by and there is one side which is a little far away, and USA and India are like 2 sides of the isosceles triangle that are somewhat closer, and China is here. And this is where, you know, we need to leverage this. The Americans, I don't know how it will pan out under Donald Trump, maybe we have to readjust. But for last 2.5 years, what he has done with in concert with Obama is to try and place some kind of a counterbalance on the Chinese aggression and offensive attitude. The Prime Minister has spoken, for example, about Vistarvad versus Vikasvad. Vistarvad is the expansionist tendency of China, and he has been critical of it. So he has tried to put together some kind of a structure, or let's call it a loose coalition, by which we can grow and become China's equal. On the omnipresent India, the idea is that we can only become a leading power or great power if we are everywhere and all the time. And that's what Prime Minister says. In India now there is a government, you know, which is everywhere and all the time. So he uses, for example, rescue diplomacy from Yemen to Nepal to, you know, Saudi Arabia. Whenever our citizens are trapped or citizens of other countries, we actually have been now able to go out there and do these things. So humanitarian diplomacy. Then there are other things, for example, these daring raids we have done, surgical strikes in Myanmar and then
you
Pakistan.
Mean you're talking of a strong, confident and an assertive India?
Yeah, and one which has a clear goal.
That's
and that was what was missing in the doctrine.
I take it from there, a clear goal. If viewers, you want to know about all this and more, you must read this book called The Modi Doctrine, The Foreign Policy of India's Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, by Sreeram Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs. He speaks about it in detail in this book. Thank you so much for joining us in today's discussion of Business India. Thank you, Professor Chaulia, for coming us and giving us your time. Thank you.